Namaskar, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi. I have someone really special with me today. I have someone for the first time, David Zhang, who has his own channel called David Zhang, who watches China extremely carefully, just like a lot of us do in India as well. So, David, firstly, thank you so much for taking out the time, accepting my invite, and coming here and giving us your insight about China in advance, firstly.
Thanks for inviting me, Adi. I actually watched your few videos recently. It popped up on my feed. It's very interesting to understand what goes on in the Indian mindset when it comes to China as well.
Thank you so much indeed. If we could work and learn with each other, it'll be very, very good. I want to
Yeah.
ask you right at the get go, where do you think China is today as far as its perceived power is concerned? China used to think it's a very strong country. Does it still think the same, or is there a change in thought process?
Yeah, if you had asked me maybe during 2020, during COVID and whatnot, I would say that there was a clear increase in terms of the desire to be aggressive to the neighboring countries like India and even in Taiwan. We see so many of these flyovers, right? And it felt like Xi Jinping was really about to flex his muscles. In the last year or so, it seems to me that there is a decrease. It's not very apparent yet, but to me, it seems like there's a decrease in the level of aggression. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not supplying the issues around the world, like supplying Russia, supplying Iran, and supplying even Pakistan in the recent conflict. But I think that there's a slight shift. Now, does that mean that their end objective of becoming a military power that can rival that of the U.S. That objective still remains, and I think it will never go away. That's one of the fundamental objectives of the Chinese Communist Party. But when it comes to the current situation, I think if you ask me now, it might change later. I think that the ambition might have died down a little bit. It's a temporary one.
Is that due to what do you think that is because of? Is because of internal problems or the geopolitics of being China itself?
Yeah, I think it's multiple issues. Internally, it's a big factor. We just recently saw that there was an economics meeting that decided, well, China can't keep overproducing things like solar panels and electric cars, and being able to drop down cost of those cars to fraction of what other companies can make because nobody's buying enough of it, right? But with the trade war as well, there's a deficit in China. There's a lack of consumerism. There's a lack of consumer confidence. So internally, that's a big factor. Internationally, you see that it hasn't really worked out for the Chinese idea of what they want to do. The Russian-Ukraine war has come to a standstill. Iran just recently saw a quite devastating shift in what just happened there. Israel is obviously very, very against what Iran is doing, because Iran is largely supplied by China, whether that's through the oil purchase or through its cooperation agreements, right? They have this like 25-year agreement. But with the Pakistan-India situation as well, it's very complicated. So for China right now, they're in an awkward situation where they're not so welcomed politically, militarily, or even economically around the world as much as what they hope for. With the Belt and Road as well, we're seeing a lot of the negative effects of that massive debt situation come down. So if you judge all of those things, it seems they need a temporary reset, and they're not really in a position to compete for number one at this stage.
So, what are they trying to do? Settle for some time?
Yeah, China's very good at buying time, right? They did that. Actually, one of the most prominent example is the phase one trade deal with the U.S. They
Yeah.
agreed to everything, but then COVID came, the pandemic locked everything down. They didn't have to fulfill the obligations. You see that now too. They're trying to buy time. They're very good at buying time. They just need a temporary reset.
Hmm. That's interesting. Why would you think Xi Jinping, who's been very aggressive, would agree to a reset?
So there's really two lines of thinkings, and I'll say both because I think it's worth to have people make their own judgments based on this. One is obviously there's been a lot of rumors around that he's lost power, so he's really not the one who has control and decision making anymore. So people in the party wants this reset. That's not him, right? The other line is that Xi Jinping is still in power, but he's been forced out of his hands because of just the situation. The reason why this second argument still stands very validly is if you look at the end of 2022, when Xi Jinping suddenly decided that zero COVID, this lockdown model, wasn't working anymore, and he just abruptly ended that order within 30 days. So it shows us that Xi Jinping is not inflexible. He is willing to change if things are really, really bad. So he's not somebody we might think of him as, say, that he gives a decision or he gives an order, that thing gets carried out to the end. He's actually flexible in some cases if things are really bad. The assessment of Xi Jinping is that he's not very educated on how to run a country. That's just what Chinese people think. But he's very educated on how to ensure the survival of the party and survival of the political state. So he knows a lot of different ways to ensure that, if this thing that he's doing, like say the economy is tanking, is going to threaten the legitimacy of the Communist Party, he will choose ways to ensure that the party survives, even if it means going back on his policies. So those are the two kind of thinkings. I'm not so sure which one is correct yet, as I'm also watching the situation unfold. But there's been a lot of evidence pointing to that he might have lost power. So in that sense, decision makers in the party are saying that, look, we need to go back to maybe a decade ago, maybe before Xi Jinping was in power, this friendlier version of China, right, that we all were, so fooled by. Which, in the sense, I guess we kind of briefly talked about this, that Xi Jinping helped make a lot of countries realize the nature of the communist regime in China, what they're capable of doing around the world. So in that sense, you should be thankful for Xi Jinping for showing the true colors. But there's a degree of wanting to go back to that now.
I have two questions for you in this particular aspect. One is, your tweet, which we will talk about after this. But we have seen walkbacks by Xi Jinping on his policies. For example, dual circulation.
Yeah.
Right. That was one policy that he started up, and he said, "Oh, we need to do this." And today, no one talks about it.
Yeah.
The recent economic review did not mention dual circulation. He has not spoken about it. So, which is very interesting that he has backed off of certain policies which was actually dual circulation is a good policy. Um, so he's backing off from certain things, which, in your opinion, does it not indicate that somebody is able to put some pressure on him?
Yeah, so that's one thing that I think a lot of American scholars tend to ignore, is that when we say that Xi Jinping has total power, that there's no check and balance within him. Even at the height of his power, I think he's still bound by certain resistance. It's just the level of resistance that he gets. You're right. Dual circulation is interesting specifically because China's always wanted a internal circulation where you have within China, but also certain countries, right, relocating supply chains and all that. The U.S. is doing that. I think every country wants that done. So you're right. It's not a bad thing to do. But I think what he has done is over the last, especially again going back to after COVID was zero COVID was done in China, so starting in 2023, I don't think the party expected the level of deflationary, like the level of downturn that the country would go through. I think that they thought they would be able to bounce back. But the situation so far is, over the last 2-3 years, there hasn't been any improvement. So, at the end of the day, I like to think that the people in China obviously are suffering, but it's these times that really alert Xi Jinping to say that we need to maybe turn back a little bit. So over the last years or so, you see these like slight step backs on the economy, slight invitations to the private sector to say that, hey, look, let's welcome you back a little bit more. Obviously, nobody believes them anymore, because that's what I say, the consumer confidence and the industrial confidence in China, or you could say the business confidence in China is declining, right? All these American firms are leaving, different firms are leaving. So it will take a very long time for that to come back. And in that sense, you say there's no resistance in China. Obviously, still there are going to be people who say, look, this is what you've done. Even if you don't listen to me, you need to at least know that that's the reality.
That's interesting. You're saying that a little more easy sort of a situation, but we don't see that actually on the ground. We see abnormal decisions being taken by China. For example,
Yes.
Apple has moved a lot of its production to India. The 17 is, yeah, I think 17. Yeah, 17 is supposed to come out now
Mhm.
in September. It's already July. So, of course, the production would be at full power. And because of the tariffs, India was producing almost 30% more iPhones in this last year than anybody else in the world. So, the maximum production came from India. Now, what China has done, Dave, for yesterday is asked all its Foxconn employees to get back home. There were 300 senior engineers who were kind of assisting this entire process. Now they're all going home. Now that's not going to build any confidence in the country. Your rare earth bans and stuff like that, that's not going to build confidence within this thing. My point is, by doing this, China is alienating itself a little more because countries will tolerate this for a little bit and then come up with their own solutions.
That's exactly the issue, right? Because I think a lot of times, I think even India in the past was okay with the behavior of China because they had the money, they had the opportunities, they were the ones you go to for anything, that you
Yeah.
wanted, right? But that's no longer the case because
Nope.
India's becoming a replacement, Vietnam's becoming a replacement for the lower side of manufacturing. But you're right, with the iPhone case, it's very interesting because this is not a decision that Tim Cook is going to make and say, next 2 years we'll do this in India, and then 3 years later we'll go back to China.
Mhm.
It's a decision that's going to it's a fundamental decision that I think to move out of China. So this is a trend that the party knows is not going to end because because in China everything is political, right? Everything is tied to the politics. So if the politics doesn't change, then you're
Mhm.
telling the world that this is not going to change, right? People like yourself, people like advisors to these multinational companies aren't stupid enough to think that China will go back to what it was. So even if if Xi Jinping really lost power and these people are like, oh, let's pretend like we're going to go back to the way they were before him, it's not going to happen. That's what I don't agree with a lot of talks on Twitter saying that, oh, even if Xi Jinping steps down, maybe they'll fool us again. I don't think that will happen. I think the
No.
world is reaching a certain degree of understanding of the state of China, that it's no longer the same as their understanding maybe 10 years ago. So I'm not worried about that. So I think that point is very valid. Yeah.
Let's get back to Xi Jinping. Interestingly, when he got re-crowned, re-anointed as the king of China, we saw him treating Hu Jintao badly.
Yeah.
Now, in traditional civilizational countries like India, China, you know, you don't treat your elders bad in public. You don't do
Yeah.
that.
No.
You have
No.
fights behind doors, fair enough. Everybody
Yes.
does. But in our kind of societies, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, which are traditional old civilizations, you don't do that. It's
Yes.
not
Yes. You
all right.
don't.
So he sent a very hard message out.
Mhm.
Now I see even the Chinese media is reporting the re-emergence of Hu Jintao, and I'm like,
Yes.
yo, what's that happening?
Yes.
Then I see your tweet, which was a thread, and I'll try and put this at the bottom so that people can see this. He wrote it pretty well, and I'll uh, request you to explain
Mhm.
the emergence of elders as you've kind of put it across. And we know the Beda here and this and that, but can you just put all of that into context and help us understand what your logic was about what's happening with Xi Jinping?
Right. So the argument by many people is that elder politics is dead in China because Xi Jinping has done what exactly you said, removed Hu Jintao publicly in front of every media camera possible. What I think is I wouldn't call it a misunderstanding of the CCP's history, but elder politics is a norm of the CCP, not an instance, not a one unique instance. The reason is the concept of elders is that these are the so-called revolutionary leaders of the Communist Revolutionary War. So these are people like, for example, Mao Zedong was a CCP elder in that sense because they fought off the Japanese, fought off the nationalists, whatever. That's a whole other conversation. But these people had the status of being respected inside the CCP. So what they did was this group of people that had a lot of influence, even if they don't have a real title. So an analogy would be like this, right? If, say, Trump one day, he's no longer the president, but he still has a lot of influence in the Republican Party. Or maybe, Prime Minister Modi is no longer the prime minister, but he still has a lot of say in that. So that's kind of the role that these elders play. Even if they don't have real positions of power, they're still a final decision or a key decision maker. So this has been extended from Mao Zedong down to Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping famously had this central advisory council where he was able to give a lot. They're called advice, but they're
Collective
not really.
leadership.
Yeah, like the leadership.
Yeah.
They're basically, speaking properly for the parties, so-called, or they represent what the party wants. Now, this also happened during Hu Jintao's time as well. Jiang Zemin, who was the leader before him, was still holding the chair of the military role for, I think, 3 or 4 years. So he was basically still running part of the show as well. So it goes all the way. The only person that didn't do this was Hu Jintao. He went on a naked retirement, which basically means he got stripped. He gave away all of his power. So then fast forward to Xi Jinping. In 2022, we saw what happened there in the closing ceremony with Hu Jintao. We thought that, this is dead. But no, this is just a temporary thing, because what happens when Xi Jinping is, for example, sick, or maybe he can't conduct running the country anymore, is everyone in Xi Jinping's circle is a follower. There's no leaders outside of him, because he's made sure that everyone is simply a worker that works for him. They're not a cabinet level leader, or they're not an official that has independent power to lead. So, because he concentrated everything into his own hand, right? So let's say when he's sick or when something happens to him, what happens to the country? Well, that's when these elders, remember, there's a series of these retired high-level officials that over the years have cultivated very large power bases and very large amount of influence. So these people, even if they're not as respected as, say, Mao Zedong, they're still respected enough in the current age to play an important role. So that's why when things like this could happen, that they could come out and then they could sort of manage the situation. So that's where we think the whole idea of Xi Jinping lost power came from. It's that the elders are coming out to they sort of regained a foothold from the moment that they were kind of denied that a few years ago. So now the situation is, if things are dire in the party, again, we talk about the survival of the party, right? Everyone inside the party will use that as an excuse to say that we need to take power back because this is the survival of the party. What Xi Jinping has done is going to put us into ruins. So let's do something else. So that's their excuse. And I'll add one final point about the nature of the military, because if you remember, in 1993, when Deng Xiaoping went on a southern tour for the reform and opening up, the PLA Daily, which is the People's Liberation Army newspaper, wrote an editorial piece called that we will protect, something along the lines of we will protect reform and opening up, so that they came out supporting Deng Xiaoping. If it hadn't been for the military's support, what Jiang Zemin at the time, who was the leader, would have gone back on reform and opening up. So the military has an important role in the CCP. It's the party's military, but they can at key moments choose to support who they think is the right civilian leader. In that case, back then it was Deng Xiaoping. Currently, if something happened, they could choose to support the elders, to think that this is to ensure the survival of the party. So these are not some outrageous claims. This is in fact, elder politics is the normal thing that happens in China.
Isn't the military today taking out, his own blood brother, as he used to call it, the 72-year-old vice chairman, not taking out every single Xi Jinping appointed person from the military today, along with his entire entourage?
Yeah, well, you see a lot of the top generals of Xi's closest allies, He Weidong, this is the guy that's put into place to fight against Taiwan. Mao Hua, right, very important to Xi Jinping. A lot of the key commanders of the Eastern, Western theaters and the Southern theaters as well, commanders are being replaced, swapped out, purged, etc. And this is very abnormal. You don't. It's like you don't shoot the best. You don't shoot yourself in the foot. You don't replace the best generals that you put into place suddenly just because you're still, you decided that they're not good enough, right? So that's why I'm saying the people that think this is a self-purge, it started by Xi Jinping. It was back in the days, maybe 2 years ago, but it doesn't make sense now that you've gone through so many iterations of your own people and you still say, oh, these aren't loyal enough to me. It doesn't work like that, right? You're sort of setting yourself up for failure if these people were coming in a year after you had purged those guys, and then now you say that, oh yeah, these aren't good enough. So to me, it feels like that these are done by people opposite of Xi to remove his power base, and then that seems more like it's the situation here.
Who do you think that is?
You're talking about the ones who are running the show, like who was against Xi Jinping?
Who are taking these decisions? It has to be someone really high up in the military taking this decision. It can't be taken by some low-ranking general or the defense
Yes.
minister hasn't lasted that long. I remember this was a funny thing, by the way. The Indian defense minister went and met Li Shangfu, right? The last one.
Yeah. Yeah. Li
Yes,
Shangfu. Yes. Yes.
we met Li Shangfu. Oh, joint statements came out. Oh, okay, there's a thaw between India and China and this and that. And by the time the defense minister landed back in India, he looked back and Li Shangfu was no more the defense minister. We're like, what?
Yes, it's like, it's hilarious, but it's also sad
We,
because
we
so
cracked jokes. China got scared.
no, you're right. It's like who is the one in charge? Honestly, frankly, I'll tell you, there's speculations, there's guesses. All I know is that if Xi Jinping is not running the military, it would be Zhang Youxia, the vice chair. And exactly who he decides to listen to, I think there's some names floating around. There's Wen Jiabao, the former premier. There's Li Ruihuan, who's also a former, I think, vice president. But
Vice president.
but these are 70, 80, 90-year-old retired people, right? I feel like they can't even get up in the morning properly. But so what I've heard, now again, don't take this as confirmation, it's just something maybe to get our thoughts going, is that they're forming sort of like a transitional government or a transitional party council type of thing, where they take iterations of different retired people and they kind of form this little discussion group type of thing. But what doesn't make sense to me is that who actually gets the final decision say in the circle, because you have so many people. Obviously every faction and every little person wants to do it for their own benefits. So it's very difficult for me to see how this is going to last. So I think ultimately there needs to be still a final decision maker. And then that's where my argument for this whole thing comes in, which is that that's the flaw of the system, because you're like trying to not recreate another Xi Jinping, where you try to not recreate another Mao Zedong. But just because you run it collectively, that was the exact reason how Xi Jinping was born in the first place, right? Because there was a whole power struggle between two different factions, and they thought that Xi Jinping wasn't going to take part in that, or that he was relatively tame, they can control him. And then little did they know that this happened. So I think at the end of the day, it's a problem with the system that often breeds these type of people. So you say that, oh yeah, this is going to last. It's not. And I think that's what we have to watch for the upcoming fourth plenum, which is supposedly where things could get repealed.
There was this CPC school teacher, I forget her name. She had written these articles in the American media. I think Hudson Institute or somewhere she wrote these articles about Xi
Is this
Jinping's.
Cai Xia?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been years I've read any one of her articles, but she had written this interesting article where she said that he feels that he is intellectually not sound. He doesn't match up to the rest of them. So his arrogance is not arrogance; is basically protectionism,
I
which I
can.
remember. Yeah.
No, I agree. I've heard similar things. I actually heard it from a drinking buddy of Xi Jinping. So when Xi was in his like younger years, was he already had this twisted belief of what his vision of China, right? His vision of the party. So in some sense that, yeah, like Chinese people often say that he's not well educated. He's not intellectually good, but he's politically very good, like
Very good.
politically very educated. He
That
knows
that
how it works in the party.
Yeah, that you can make out. That you can make out. The way he
Yeah.
took power, you can make that out. And he created a. Where do you think he slipped? Where do you think he slipped? Did he open up too many fronts? Did he not calculate his economy properly? Was it COVID? Where do you think Xi Jinping's the epitome of power, which is 2022, post-COVID even? Where do you think he lost?
I think he lost. I don't think so. Here's my thing. I don't know how much of this can be explained in one or two sentences. but I think he hasn't lost it yet. I simply
Mhm.
think that. So here's the thing: the only factor that can really change somebody like Xi Jinping is his health. There's really no other way around it. If because there's an image, you can probably find this online, of him
That
meeting the Vietnamese general secretary. He had
that
this like
bald patch.
he had the
Yeah.
cut. So I think if this didn't happen, I don't think we can talk about what we're talking about right now, because frankly, if it continues this way, it will continue to go down this way. It won't change. So if you let me point to a point where I think he's lost it, or where he kind of,
Slipped.
didn't slip, I think honestly, day one, because that was his vision. That was what he set out to do. He is in Chinese they call him the great accelerator of the
Yeah.
CCP's demise, right?
Yeah.
That's actually his vision, and I don't think he will change. He will continue to do this, just as you can't expect Mao Zedong to not do what he did, because that's simply the nature of what he wanted to do, was just power struggle, political
Mm.
purges, and all these.
Mm.
So I think at the end of the day, it's not about him slipping, because he doesn't view it that way. He thinks what he's doing is to the benefit of the party, uh, and that's pretty scary actually, because the effects of that is all of the other troubles that we
Yeah.
saw. So
He seems to be a person who's quite egotistic.
mm,
He's not able to. I've seen him in summits, right? We observe all this stuff. He's not able to be the center of attention. He doesn't have the personality of that. Because he's from China, okay, he gets attention. But let's say if he was the president of Thailand, he wouldn't have got that kind of attention. He doesn't have the personality for it.
yeah, that's
So
that's
yeah,
That's
please.
no, that's very interesting, because his whole time he's trying to create this cult of personality, but he doesn't have one, right? So
Nope.
they're very desperate to try to create that. So that's what I think. It's an important point to note, that what Xi Jinping has done, unlike the other previous leaders, is he used a lot of money to buy influence. That's precisely, like, I mean, if you look at BRICS, he's not attending this year for some reason, but BRICS would China wouldn't be influential in the BRICS if Xi Jinping wasn't giving up billions of dollars every time
Yeah.
he goes. It just doesn't make sense, because realistically, I don't think that countries really want to be with China unless it's just for the money. That's his way of buying the center of attention.
Honestly, China is a good hedging bet if you want to play games with America. I'm not kidding. That's how the global South looks at it. So
It's a yeah,
yeah, how do you think the Saudis got this bigger deal with Trump?
yeah, that's true.
Trump knows, oh, Iran, Iraq, who sorted out Iran and Iraq? China. Oh, that's American influence. We can't have that. So he's
Yes,
now pushed out China from the Middle East completely. Yes,
but
China will have his inroads and deals here and there and stuff like that. But the higher level diplomacy that China was playing at one time is gone.
yeah, but I think that's where India is important to come in, because I'm sure the Americans are very happy with dealing with India as sort of the leader of Southeast Asia, or of Asia, rather than China. And I think, frankly, I don't know if you saw the latest deal with Vietnam. China isn't very happy about it, but Vietnam's very happy. And I think
Yeah,
if
well,
if
that
if this keeps happening, then to me, I feel like India can step up even more in the next 5 years or so.
uh,
Uh, so I think that's important for balancing the global landscape too. But I don't know about the Middle East. I think it's a very different thing. I
yeah.
think it's more, it's. I want to say that because so here I'll tell you what China thinks. China thinks they need distractors for the U.S., right, like militarily or whatnot, but the Middle East doesn't. I don't think they provide enough
No,
incentives
no.
to
Uh,
the rich countries in the Middle East for them to feel like that that they have so much impact there, like you mentioned. So without Iran being the question, I don't see how China. I mean, could China go to Pakistan? But it's not the same. But
Move it.
that also risks losing India completely. So yeah, I think the Middle East part is really it's. I think it's over for China, but
Mm,
where else would they go? Well, probably East Asia, and I think that's where they're moving next with Korea,
yeah,
Japan.
yeah.
They,
Yeah.
they really want to create that little triangle there.
They've lost quite a bit, as a matter of fact. North Korea went out of their hand.
Yeah.
India, this Pakistan thing has put in a bad taste in our mouth. Let me be very clear. As I was telling you offline today, the vice chief of the army staff came out and very clearly said there's one border and three enemies.
Yeah.
Now, Indian armed forces are not known for making statements like that, right? Indian armed forces are very quiet. They concentrate on their operations, and this is a non-political force. They're in their barracks. They do their job and go back home and sleep. That's it. It's their game. They're very professional. They don't. You'll never hear a never Indian Army statement on politics in India or anything else. Never. It'll never happen. And it's very
Interesting.
politically driven in the sense the leadership is political, right? So the army will report to the political leader, to what it says, no questions asked. But when the army comes out and says we had three enemies on our borders, that's very significant. And we see American generals making big statements like that. Indian generals don't. Uh, we live in a very crazy neighborhood. Imagine we're the only country in the world surrounded by two rogue nuclear powers.
Yeah.
There's no other country in the world which sits in our place. We are surrounded by radical Islam, which is crazy. We've had terrorism. We've had all sorts of these issues, and we have, apart from Russia, we've got the longest border with China.
Yeah.
So so we are in a very interesting neighborhood. So you'll not have army chiefs and air force chiefs coming out and saying this. When you look at uh, China and Russia, and you mentioned something to right now, and I want to take it up with what Wang Yi said to the EU.
Yeah.
He said, I think that was a slip of a tongue. I don't think, I don't know, because that'll ruin. If I was a Russian, I'll get pissed off. He says that, oh, we would like Russia to win. Fantastic. But we don't want the war to end because then the Americans will swing towards us.
That's
like,
exactly. Yeah.
You joker. You don't say that in the open.
No, that's what I mean. It's they need these distractors, right? Because you don't. So I'll just kind of respond to the India one point that you mentioned. I think India needs to make its own decisions, which obviously they're already doing really well at. Which is unlike many other countries. I think India doesn't have to side with anyone, which is not something you could say about many countries, say in Southeast Asia, right? Like the Philippines. I love the Philippines, but they have to. They've been bullied so much that they have to side with the U.S. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're very happy with everything that happens dealing with the Americans. But I think India is in a position where it might be the only country outside of maybe some like the Saudis or some other countries. But I think India is so unique in that sense. And you also mentioned Wang Yi's words, which I honestly think I think he's being honest. That's what we've been talking about for so long, right? You probably think so too. He's honest, but the truth is, China right now they can't alienate EU, they can't alienate Russia, and that's what the difficulty comes in. Because I think, frankly, they tried so many times. So in the way that we describe it in Chinese is there's a three kingdom situation right now, where China is like trying to ally with EU against the Americans, and they tried doing so many times. I don't know if you ever read the history of the Three Kingdoms, but basically no alliance is forever, and sometimes it's even worse than that because every time they've tried, they've failed. So I see this as a fundamental difference. Like the EU might not be happy with Trump, might not be happy with the United States, but they're not so bad yet to the point where they say that we need to go to China for the solution.
No, that's not what happened.
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, China is losing a lot of those fronts internationally.
During this war, India-Pakistan 88-hour war, whatever, Pakistanis found themselves wanting of a military capability. I mean, we had air control over Pakistan. Now, again, Indian communication is so beautiful that we don't tell the world that. But in any case, we've hit certain targets in Pakistan which made their entire air force go blind. We paralyzed their air force within about 65, 67 hours of our operations. That's it. They were done. I mean, their main command control center and their main airbase was underground. It collapsed because of our firing, and it never revived. They didn't fly. There was a 70% drop in their aircraft flying
Wow.
during the operations. So they got their, pardon the French, but they got their ass handed to them. That's Pakistan. Forget that. My point is about the Chinese weapons, right? They sold these HQ9, HQ16s to these Pakistanis, sold, gave it, whatever. Oh, they're as good as S-400s and this and that. Now, when they couldn't stop the Indian missiles, they say, no, 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 they were never supposed to stop missiles. What kind of an impact has this had? Because see, the public narrative is different. Military watchers know what happened.
Mm.
And if you look at people who are writing military analysis, they're saying, damn, these guys finished the country in 88 hours. This is the shortest capitulation ever in history.
Mm-hmm.
The Indian Army created a country in 13 days, which is Bangladesh, in 1971. And we've done something like that now. Again, not talking about it because we want to get a trade deal with America, by the way. And, when we shoot down F-16s, it doesn't really look good on the trade deal. So everybody's kind of quiet right now in India. Yeah, it's okay. Let be. We know what happened. They know what happened. Everybody knows what happened, but let's not talk about it. So that's
honestly, you bring such a good point with public versus private, not private opinion, like professional.
How do you
opinion.
think that goes down with China and the Chinese military when they see their equipment like, oh?
The thing is, nobody. So China already has a restriction on information. Nobody in China knows what happened, whether that's the case with Iran or whether that's the case.
We picked up social media chatter, which actually said, what the hell did these Pakistanis do with our equipment?
You did?
Yeah.
That's interesting, because the way I saw it was, because there was in Chinese social media, I was on there a few days after, they had heavily regulated. They usually do this a lot with the information, but they regulated where you can talk about and those things. But that's also another point that when you mentioned that is, a few years ago, you wouldn't see this type of information on Chinese social media. Nowadays, it seems like the restriction has lifted a little bit. I see so many videos on Douyin, Chinese TikTok, that you're able to talk about, even like how, in Iran, their air defense system, a lot of that is also supplied by China too. Didn't work, and they're like, "What the heck?" You can actually criticize them for it now.
Yep.
So that's very interesting. But you're right. My point I just want to make is China's very good at using the public opinions rather than the professional opinions, right? Like professionally, they probably thinks that most people would think that India won that, but public opinion-wise, maybe they think that Pakistan won that in China. So
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay.
Yeah,
that's fine, because we know how controlled the society is, and India's, we're not even bothered about. But my point is very interesting, because they're planning for a war with Taiwan with the same damn equipment.
Yeah.
And what happens to the military? Because again, 2 years ago, I think, about 2023, sometime in May, June, this time, PLA Daily, I don't know if you remember, put out an article where it came out from the rocket forces that, listen, we're not ready to fight.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They removed that article after 3 days. I have it stored somewhere in my laptop. That thing came out. And now there are, again, rumors about the rocket force. I don't know what they are right now. I don't want to kind of say it because it'll build a further rumor. I don't want to do that. But there are rumors that they're, not happy with the rocket force. They want to move that out, so on and so forth. What's happening as far as battle readiness of China is concerned? Do you think they're actually getting ready for Taiwan, or is just Xi Jinping's plays?
They're definitely preparing for Taiwan, and it's so yeah. Obviously, policy planning isn't just 1 year; it's a few years down. So when Xi came into power, he set in motion that plan, right? So that's not. I don't think that's changing. But whether they fight or not, I think that's the key here. Because even Zhang Youxia or the another Air Force general, his name is Liu Yazhou. The reason Liu Yazhou was reprimanded, purged for precisely talking about how the PLA is not ready to fight Taiwan. There's honestly, I think most of the time, if the PLA is talking about something, they're they're putting ahead a vision that they want to do within the 10, 20 years. That's for sure. But what we've seen so far, and again, that's makes me question how ready they really are, is that time and time again, we've seen that their military, the true power of their military has shown to not be as effective as we thought. And I was in Taiwan actually last month, and I was just talking to some of the legislators, the politicians, and even locals. Honestly, to tell you that the feel of an imminent invasion is so little in Taiwan that it makes me wonder either this is really good or really bad, especially from the legislators. Now, I know they don't want to create a sense of fear. No country wants to do that. But I just feel like if this is so urgent, they would at least, show a sense of urgency. But it to me feels like that they're confident in some ways that they can do this, that they can defend the island, which I hope is true. But seeing what we've seen so far with India, with the conflict so far with Iran, it just makes me question the military capabilities. And I know people say that, oh, you can't underestimate the Chinese.
You can't. You should never.
You obviously never. But there's also a real issue with practical combat readiness. I think that's two different things. Both can exist at the same time. And so far, I tend to sway. And obviously, I'm not a military expert, so I can't tell you exactly whether this is a good assessment or not. But
no, it's just at the end of it, it's an assessment. That's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to figure out what's happening. My last point to you that I want you to comment on is China would be, let's say there's an internal change within China, okay? And there are 2, 3 options in that. Xi Jinping is elevated to become the president. Somebody else becomes the general secretary. Zhang becomes the chairman. He's kind of become the grandfather of China, the Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, or whatever of China. He becomes something like that. That's option 1. Option 2 is they throw him out.
Yeah.
I mean, walk off. Thank you. Retired. Bye-bye. He's not well. Thank you, sir. Do a big military parade. People crying. Get the whole social media going. Worldwide photographs. 10 leaders come, all huggy-buggy, and Xi Jinping walks away into the sunset with his wife. The third option, which is the dangerous option, that there is warlordism. And China, I mean, if you read Chinese history, is known for that. One kingdom with the other, the middle kingdoms and stuff like that. We know what's the Chinese history is all about, what Chinese history is all about. And I fear that these theater commands shouldn't just become warlords at the end of it, because the kind of power they have, they can create a lot of issues. One doesn't agree with the other, you've got a huge challenge.
Frankly, I think the third option is the one that Trump doesn't want to see, is the one that no world leader wants to see. For some reason, I feel like they'd rather deal with the current regime than like a military, like a junta, like we see in Burma.
I don't want warlords with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
We have one on our table. We don't want another. No.
Yeah. So it's in everyone's interest to maintain the current status, so to speak. So I think more likely what's going to happen is it depends. It honestly depends, because I think it will be a mix between option 1 or 2. That I think at the end of the day, Xi Jinping will retire. He's already old enough, right? Like there's no way that he's not going to retire, whether that's due to health reasons or whatnot. But I do think that he's going to, if this comes soon, which could possibly be this fall, I would say that he loses at least one position. Possibly, I think the most important one is the Central Military Commission. The military. In that case, if he stays as a general secretary or the president, doesn't really matter, because without the military, it's different. So but I do hope that people understand this. It does not matter who comes in next. It doesn't matter who is in control. The point is that the threat of China comes from within the party principles, and if those principles remain, India will never be at peace. America will never be at peace. The world won't be at peace until that changes.
Absolutely. So no warlordism, but no CCP as well.
Yes.
There's a recent development which has happened, which triggered China quite a bit from India, which is Tibet.
Yes.
Now, Chinese have been pissed off with us since 1959 about Tibet. And we've never said much, but now we've started speaking. And well, India has now kind of figured out, okay, you want to play with us, we'll play with you. And this is not an easy step. India has been inching towards a Tibet card for now for 2 years. They've been mentioning Tibet quietly, quietly, quietly. Now it's pretty much in the open,
Mhm.
and you're short of calling it a disputed region now.
Yeah.
You're probably about 2-3 steps short of it. Uh, Biden administration came out with a Tibet policy. India has done certain things. The Dalai Lama is now at an age, so the timing is right. How do you think that plays out? Because that's like a huge vulnerability for China.
Yeah, China's always done this. Built the legitimacy of Tibet on the idea that the Panchen Lama goes to see all the top leaders
Yeah.
every 5 years, 10 years. So I think at the end of the day, it's honestly it's just talking to themselves in China. They think that this is what they think is going to convince the people to support them. Everyone else around the world knows that that's not the case. There's really no argument here, right? Is if India and the U.S. are going to do something similar to this, two is bigger than one. So I mean, I got nothing except for the fact that like sometimes they think like it's just a child's play, but it's really it's ignorance, it's willful, you know,
Hmm.
it's bullying in a sense too. But I think it's gonna eventually it just has to happen in a way that everyone else knows what's going on is true. China thinks otherwise, and I mean, I don't see a way to settle this again unless there's a huge geopolitical change within China and Tibet. But that's what my thing is. It's just trying to build its legitimacy on it. They're gonna die on that hill, right? They're not gonna admit to their wrong with Tibet, with what they've done in Tibet, and they're not gonna say that we recognize what India and the U.S. put out. So
David, I must say this was a very, very interesting conversation, and I do hope this. It was a learning experience, and with all, I mean, I don't watch media about China. I just look at guys like you, because you guys are more genuine than the media, who exaggerate so much for political purposes and stuff like that. We need to have real information, because at the end of it, if we are going to inform our public and talk to our citizens about it, we need to know, and what's and have a clear perspective about what potentially could be there. China has always a potential. So
yeah,
thank you for putting a lot of substance into that potential, and I hope we can continue this interaction in the future as well.
yeah.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for having
much.
me. Yeah, no, definitely we'll continue this as well. Hope to be back.
Sure. To the audience, please share your thoughts, share your comments, write it down, hit the like, subscribe, and of course, check out David's channel as well. Thank you so much. Namaskar.